Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region.
If I were a Jew, I would be a Zionist. As a matter of fact, you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
I have had the view for the past 24 years that the only way in which there will be peace in the Middle East is when the Arab nations know there is no division between the United States and Israel.
What my record has been, it has been unstinted in the defense and support of Israel. The United States has never and will never lose our resolve. Israel will never waver. I'm never going to leave Israel.
For the past 6 months, the images of a genocide out of Gaza have gripped the world. Razed neighborhood after razed neighborhood, mass grave after mass grave, mass slaughter after mass slaughter. Fathers carrying their children's body parts in plastic bags, mothers screaming, looking for whatever remains of their families, children left without limbs, without faces.
What did these children do wrong? What crime did they commit to deserve tons of bombs on their heads?
While the genocide of the Palestinians is carried out by the state and military of Israel, the United States, under the leadership of President Joe Biden, has played the role of its sponsor.
The defense of Israel is still critical, so there's no red line.
We are not going to create any conditions on the support that we are giving Israel to defend itself.
We will always be there by your side.
The United States strongly supports Israel and its right to defend itself from Hamas, and that support is unwavering.
I wanted to ensure, is that still the case, that the administration has no red lines?
That is still the case.
Since October 7th, the United States government has provided billions in military aid to Israel and unwavering political and legal support, both domestically and internationally, in addition to direct military support. But as the Biden administration and the Democratic Party find themselves in a political crisis in the middle of an election year, there's been a specific media narrative shift on who's actually running the show.
Nobody expects Prime Minister Netanyahu to do the things that must be done to break the cycle of violence.
It's curious to me to see Netanyahu talk the way he does when he tried to interfere in American elections.
We could go down the list of what Bibi Netanyahu has done to make Israel weaker, to make them open to that attack.
This line isn't necessarily new, but it actively erases not only U.S. culpability in the genocide of Palestinians, but Joe Biden's own ideological support of it, and what his legacy should and will be.
There's no apology to be made. None.
Welcome to Backspace, where we look at how the story is told in the headlines, and then we think about how we can tell it a little differently. On March 18th, the Washington Post published this article, detailing how President Joe Biden had found himself deeply entangled in a war he does not want and that threatened to become a defining element of his tenure. The article, drawing from 20 interviews from administration officials and external advisors, reported that the Biden administration was well aware 3 weeks into Israel's bombardment of Gaza that civilian structures were being targeted and that there was no actual plan presented by the Israelis to defeat Hamas. All this while the administration was publicly giving Israel a carte blanche to do whatever it wanted in Gaza, all while it approved more than 100 military arms sales. The article, however, relies on what has become a popular refrain from not just this administration, but also the Democratic Party, the idea that President Joe Biden, and thus the United States, is beholden to the whims of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Netanyahu, I think, made a huge mistake by making himself a partisan figure. Netanyahu's interest, in a way, politically speaking, is to prolong the war. And right now, that's a direct conflict with the Democrats and Joe Biden.
What is the President of the United States to do with an ally like that?
Israel has a prime minister now who is incapable, unwilling, and in many ways politically unable to articulate such a vision.
Netanyahu is not listening to us, and he's a part of a rather extremist project.
The goals of President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu are fundamentally at odds.
No more money to Netanyahu's war machine.
Now, there are three problems with this framing. First, it reduces the blame of not just the genocide unfolding in Gaza, but also the occupation, system of apartheid, the land theft, ethnic cleansing, to one person, Netanyahu. It furthers this idea that, hey, this isn't Israel, this isn't democratic Israel, this is Netanyahu, he's the problem here. And so if Netanyahu is the problem, If he's gone, like Schumer alluded to, then, well, there is no issue, and we're back on track to a two-state solution status quo where there is actually only one state, Israel. This purposely erases not only 75 years of history, but also ignores what are core truths about Israel as a nation from the day it was founded, especially that there is no room for Palestinians and Palestinian self-determination. While Israeli polls find little support in Israel for Netanyahu himself, his government's genocidal war has continued to be overwhelmingly popular amongst Israeli Jews. 2/3 oppose ending the occupation, 2/3 oppose aid reaching Palestinians in Gaza, and 80% believe that the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza shouldn't be taken into consideration over the course of the war. The second problem with the focus on Netanyahu as the issue is that it presents the United States as not only having no leverage on Israel, but also that the foreign policy of the world's most powerful country and military is being controlled by a small country that militarily depends on aid from it to survive. And you'd think that these folks would be a little bit more careful about the consequences of rolling out something that sounds a lot like a Israel controls America trope. And the third problem with reducing all of this, everything we have seen unfold for the last 6 months, especially to just Netanyahu's belligerence, is that it erases American direct culpability in this genocide, a genocide that would not be possible without the United States. It also requires that we ignore everything Biden himself is saying and has said and done for decades.
Early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. Were I a Jew, I would be a Zionist. And my father pointed out to me, I did not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist. You need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. I'm a Zionist.
Joe Biden is, inarguably, the most pro-Israel president in U.S. history. From his days as a senator to his tenure now as president, Biden has openly and repeatedly made his commitment to Israel as not just a country, but as a necessity known.
I don't think there's any senator who's ever done more fundraisers for AIPAC or gone around the country more for AIPAC.
And while we know that the Israel lobby plays a massive political role in the United States in a bipartisan way, Biden has never really needed the lobby. By his own admission, the roots of his affinity for and belief in Israel started when he was a child, listening to his father extol the virtue and necessity of a Jewish state post-World War II.
The miracle of Israel is Israel. It's Israel itself. The hope it inspires. The light it represents to the world.
There's an infamous story about Biden's zeal for Israel told by Menachem Begin, who was the 6th Prime Minister of Israel and the former leader of the Irgun, the Zionist paramilitary group responsible for some of the most notorious massacres in the 1948 ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. In 1982, as Israel was conducting a devastating aerial bombardment of Beirut, Begin met with a young Senator Joe Biden from Delaware. According to Begin, Biden applauded the Israeli aggression in Lebanon and said that he personally would have bombed more, even if it meant killing more women and children. For perspective, then U.S. President Ronald Reagan would go on to call Israel's actions in Lebanon a Holocaust.
Children are not avenged by the murder of other children.
During his 36-year career as a senator, Biden became the top recipient to receive money from the Israel lobby, something he, as vice president, even boasted about at a dinner in front of more than 2,000 members of the American Jewish community in 2011. But Biden's commitment to Israel really came to a head and changed the course of American-Israeli relations when he became vice president in 2008. The presidency of Barack Obama marked a critical moment in U.S. history. He was seen as this fresh-faced future vision for a country that, after suffering the worst attack on its soil since World War II, had plunged itself into political and economic disaster.
2 wars, a planet in peril, the worst financial crisis in a century.
But while so much hope and change rested on the young senator's shoulders during his campaign, he was missing experience, especially in foreign policy.
With relatively little foreign policy experience of your own, how will you rely on so many Clinton advisors and still deliver the kind of break from the past that you're promising voters?
Well, I am...
I want to hear that.
You want to hear that? Well, Hillary, I'm looking forward to you advising me as well.
And that's where Joe Biden came in, the senator from Delaware who was known as the foreign policy guy. Biden was the architect for President Obama's foreign policy, a foreign policy that, while focused on diplomacy, also expanded America's war footprint across the world. It was also a foreign policy that made Obama one of the most pro-Israel presidents in U.S. history. Despite Obama's well-known dislike of also then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and their tumultuous relationship, especially over the Iran deal, his presidency saw the relationship between Israel and the United States reach unprecedented heights, especially in military support. As almost a parting gift, the Obama administration left Israel with a $38 billion military aid package, the biggest in U.S. history.
No president has done as much for Israel's security as President Obama.
In a 2020 article for Jewish Currents, Peter Beinart noted that Vice President Biden actively and repeatedly shielded Netanyahu from any consequences and criticism from President Obama. Biden wanted Obama to show stronger support for Israel and its right to defend itself. Beinart, in his piece, ultimately argued that were he to be the Democratic nominee, Biden would set back any progress the Democrats may have made ideologically on defending the Israeli government. That rupture, for many, became evident in President Barack Obama's strikingly different approach to Israel and the United States' response to the October 7th attacks.
And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. All of us have are complicit to some degree. I look at this and I think back, what could I have done during my presidency to move this forward?
And so, what happened with Biden's presidency? What have the Palestinians gotten, the Israelis? The Donald J. Trump presidency was undoubtedly disastrous for Palestinians. It saw the expansion of settlements, the Abraham Accords, the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and the defunding of UNRWA. The Biden administration, having campaigned as the antidote to MAGA, did little to reverse much of the previous administration's extreme policies. Instead, it embraced most of them and set them as the new status quo, until now. Over the last 6 months, the Biden administration has created a new normal in the American approach to the Israeli occupation of Palestine, that of genocide. While the administration has spent those 6 months saying that they have some concerns about Israel's conduct, there is nothing this president and the administration have done to show that they have any other interest than the continuation of the genocide in Gaza. And they can't just throw that blame on Netanyahu. After all, was it Netanyahu who made Biden say that he saw with his own eyes beheaded Israeli babies? Was it Netanyahu who made Biden say that he has no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about their number of dead? Was it Netanyahu who made Biden flood arms into Israel, who made Biden and Blinken bypass Congress twice on emergency weapons sales to Israel, push for an $18 billion military aid package, have every spokesperson of the administration get up in front of journalists and cover for Israel's documented and undeniable war crimes? And was it Netanyahu who made former Clinton advisor Aaron David Miller say in an interview with The New Yorker that Biden does not hold Palestinians as equals to Israelis? It took one phone call from Biden to Netanyahu following the World Central Kitchen massacre to make Israel temporarily open up 3 aid corridors to allow food and medical supplies into North Gaza, which it has been starving for months. And we're supposed to believe this president is just paralyzed from doing anything to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians? To stop this genocide? Really? The U.S. news coverage of Joe Biden's role in this genocide has to change. And that change begins with reckoning with the simple truth that Gaza is Joe Biden's genocide. Biden's statements and the statements of any and all administration officials need to be seen in the context of both the history of the president and the current actions of this government. By refusing to do that, the basic contextual work, U.S. news media is doing propaganda for the Biden administration that allows them to shirk any and all culpability in this genocide. Newsrooms are also paving the way for the Biden administration's carte blanche to Israel to escalate the war into a regional one. But for the U.S. news media to have that reckoning, it needs to first reckon with the role it's played over 6 months in pushing lies and Israeli talking points that have made the case for the destruction and slaughter in Gaza. But that assumes that it would even want to. As we noted in our October episode, the U.S. media works to protect Israel, not hold it accountable. What we've seen from U.S. newsrooms since October 7th exponentially exceeds the level of propaganda we saw in the lead up to the U.S. invasion of Iraq.